Hello my good friends, today we'll take a look at the 10 new anniversary weapons after they were changed in the last update on the 30th of April. I might create another video for the new PvE only elite skills as well, but this video will focus exclusively on the new weapons. Each class got a new weapon with a requirement on their main attribute that is customized upon acquisition. The special thing about those weapons is that they require attributes that usually don't align with that specific weapon type. The new weapons are Axe for Elementalist, Flatbow for Ritualist, Shortbow for Assassin, daggers for Paragon, hammer for Monk, scythe for Necromancer, shield for Mesmer, spear for Warrior, staff for Dervish, and sword for Ranger. You might have noticed that there are 8 martial weapons, 1 staff and 1 shield. We'll first look into the 8 martial weapons. They have a couple of things in common. After the update, weapon damage now properly scales of the weapon's attribute, which is great and makes a lot of martial weapons viable even outside of niche situations. Generally, the new martial weapons are great in 3 scenarios. First, you want to use a weapon of a class that isn't your primary nor secondary profession. Second, you really don't want to invest attributes into the usual attribute of the weapon. Or third, your main attribute will have more points invested into it than the usual attribute. Now I will give a couple of examples for each of these situations. This list isn't complete and is just supposed to give you some ideas where these new weapons are superior to normal ones. Let's start with the first scenario, that you want to use a weapon of a class that isn't your primary nor secondary profession. Assassins and speed clears are usually tanks with shadow form that run around, pull enemies and tank things. In a lot of those situations, assassins will be required to bring a secondary profession, for example Warrior in DOA to meet your shield's attribute, or Necromancer in Shards of Ore for barbs. While assassins have daggers available to them and they will usually deal more damage using those instead of the new bow, there are situations when the assassin can't or doesn't want to get to melee range to the enemy. 2 specific examples for this are Second Room Foundry and Jadov in DOA. Rangers are similar to assassins and speed clears with regard to them being avid shadow form users. Same as assassins, they have access to daggers which are usually preferred. One huge upside of swords is that they can be used alongside shields. So if you as a ranger expect to take a lot of damage and need to stay on your shield, then this new sword allows you to deal a couple of extra damage while doing so. Let's get to the second scenario, that you really don't want to invest attributes into the usual attribute of the weapon and you don't have skills that have relevant scaling from that attribute. While it is a meme build, a good example for this is a WoS Necro that needs to spread his points into Earth Prayers, Curses and Soul Reaping and would like not to spend 9 points into Scythe Mastery. Even though you're using a Scythe Mastery ability in your build, in this case Eremite's Attack, the scaling is so low and irrelevant that you can get away with not investing any points into it and instead spare those for better scaling attributes. Another example that could have also been mentioned in the first scenario is Warrior. Similar to my point about assassins, warriors sometimes might not want to go into melee range for some reason, for example in order to keep standing in honor. Here the new spear might come in handy and give some new opportunities for micro optimizations. Now to the third scenario, that your main attribute will have more points invested into it than the usual weapons attribute. Daggers by Paragon get 16 or even 20 leadership with Hero's Refrain casted on himself. This is considerable additional damage compared to daggers that would only scale off the 12 or 16 dagger mastery you would have before or after Heroic's Refrain. The exact same thing is true for Spirit's Strength Ritualists that get 16 spawning power instead of, in this case, 12 marksmanship. Sadly, there is no realistic scenario in which you would want to use the Monk Hammer or the Elementalist Axe outside of builds that get hard outclassed by something else. They both have options to hit an enemy from range and usually have something better to do than auto-attacking with a martial weapon. That being said, in speed clears some situations might come up in which you could get a couple extra damage points out of those weapons. Now that we are done with the martial weapons, up next is the Dervish Staff. Since it is a caster weapon that is unaffected by damage increases from attributes after hitting its requirement, it was unaffected by the patch. It is definitely best in slot if you don't need a staff with a specific attribute to reduce cast times. It allows you to deal slightly more damage with your ranged staff attacks if you don't have any investments into another caster attribute. Also note that it deals holy damage, which is doubled against undead enemies. There really isn't a downside to using the staff apart from cast times on secondary class spells, so always use this staff as default unless you have a reason to use something else. Next up is the Mesmer shield, which is an amazing item, especially after the update that fixed the bug and now allows it to be modded with a shield handle. Any Mesmer build will meet the 9 fast casting requirement, and 8 additional armor on your shield set results in 13% less received damage. This is good for almost any situation and will therefore be used in a lot of speed clears. Especially in builds that have a flat damage reduction that is applied after armor effects, like Shadow Form, but also the effect from an Armor of Salvation, the percentual damage mitigation is even higher and makes this a truly amazing item. Overall, I really like the Anniversary update in general, even before the most recent bug fix and balance patch. But now a lot of these weapons are actually viable and have great use cases all over the game. While they won't turn the speed clear or casual PvE meta upside down by themselves, they have the potential to further enable some interesting builds. It is really great we got this kind of content, and I'm looking forward to people making small adaptations to incorporate them into their build and gear setup.